John Carter stood in the middle of the grand assembly hall of the Galactic Council. The massive room stretched out in all directions, filled with tiered seating where representatives from over 50 alien species watched him. Some had tentacles, others had multiple eyes, and a few were just clouds of gas in containment suits. Their expressions ranged from anger to pity. John kept his back straight and his face calm. After 15 years as a Navy SEAL and 5 years as an Earth diplomat to the stars, he knew when to show no fear. The supreme judge of the council, a 12-foot-tall bug-like being called Zex Thul, clicked its mandibles together. Its voice boomed. Through the translation system, John Carter of Earth, you have been found guilty of interfering with the lawful business activities of the Doraxian Empire on the mining planet Krell 6. John bit back a sharp reply. There had been nothing lawful about what the Doraxians were doing. They had been stealing resources from a planet that belonged to the small and peaceful Vril people. When the Vril protested, the Doraxians started killing them. Simple as that. But the Doraxian Empire had 20 seats on the council. Earth had 1. Politics among the stars wasn't much different from politics back home. Zex Thul continued. Though your actions were illegal under council law, some members have argued for mercy due to your species' primitive understanding of galactic politics. A few hisses and growls came from the Doraxian section of the hall. Their gray, shark-like faces showed no mercy. Therefore, instead of death, you are sentenced to banishment on Nexus 9. A gasp swept through the hall. Even some of the Doraxians looked surprised. Execution would be kinder, whispered a voice near John. He turned to see his assigned defender, a small green alien named Plex, looking at him with 6 wide eyes filled with horror. What's Nexus 9? John asked quietly. Class 5 Deathworld. Nothing sentient survives there. The Council uses it to dispose of the worst criminals. Most die within days. John nodded slowly. So that was their game. Not an official execution, but the same end result. Zex Thul banged a gavel-like appendage. Sentence to be carried out immediately. This session is ended. 4 robotic guards approached John. They didn't need weapons. Their metal hands could crush stone. John didn't fight as they took his arms and led him away from the center of the hall. As they neared the exit, a slender, blue-skinned woman stepped into their path. Ambassador Lyra from the Aloran people. Her species was known for their empathic abilities and their fairness. She had been one of the few to speak in John's defense during the trial. A moment, please, she said to the guards. The robots paused, their programming requiring them to respect council ambassadors. Lyra looked at John with large purple eyes. I am truly sorry, John Carter. This sentence is excessive. No one has survived more than a standard cycle on Nexus 9. It is a world that hates life. John shrugged as best he could in the grip of the robots. Am I allowed any personal items? Lyra seemed surprised by the question. Standard banishment protocol allows for basic survival gear and 1 personal item of non-technological nature. Can I keep my knife? Your knife? Lyra blinked slowly. Yes, I suppose that would be permitted. It will be with your survival kit. John smiled then, which seemed to confuse the blue ambassador even more. Then they're giving me more than I had. On my first deployment to the jungle. This'll be a vacation. Lyra didn't understand his calm. She had never seen a human face certain death before. She expected tears, pleading, anger, not this strange acceptance. Not a smile. You do understand what Nexus 9 is? The atmosphere itself is toxic to most life forms. The planet has extreme temperature shifts. The native fauna includes predators that would see you as prey. Even the plants are dangerous. Sounds like Australia with extra steps, John said with a small grin. I'll be fine, Ambassador. The guards began moving again, pulling John toward the preparation chambers where he would be given his survival kit and loaded into a drop pod. Lyra walked alongside them. I have filed an official protest. This sentence violates several council guidelines on proportional punishment, but Doraxian influence runs deep, and appeals take time. Don't waste your energy, Ambassador. I exposed their illegal mining operation and cost them billions in profit. They want me dead. Politics is politics, even among the stars. They reached the preparation chamber, a stark white room with a single metal table. On it sat a gray jumpsuit, a small pack and a sealed clear container with John's combat knife inside. The exosuit is designed to shield you from the worst elements, explained a technician, who was clearly uncomfortable with the whole process. But its systems will fail within days. The pack contains basic supplies, water purification, emergency, rations for a week, basic medical supplies. John nodded as the guards finally released him. He rubbed his wrists and took a step toward the table. How long until I leave? 30 minutes for prep, then direct transport to the drop pod, the technician said. The guards left, but Lyra stayed, watching as John began to change into the gray jumpsuit. I do not understand your species, she said finally. Facing certain death, you show no fear. John zipped up the suit and tested its flexibility. Not bad, he'd worn worse. It's not certain death if I don't die, Ambassador. But Nexus 9 is a tough place, I get it. But humans come from a tough place too. Earth isn't quite a Class 5 death world, but it's close. We evolved running from predators that could tear us apart. We survived ice ages with nothing but animal. Skins and fire. We're hard to kill. He opened the clear box and took out his knife, testing its edge with his thumb. Still sharp. The blade was 7 inches of high-carbon steel with a serrated section near the handle. Not fancy, but reliable. Besides, he continued, the Doraxians made a mistake. They think they're getting rid of a problem. What they're really doing is setting me free. Free? Lyra's voice was full of confusion. John slid the knife into a sheath on the jumpsuit's leg. On Earth, I had rules, laws, diplomatic protocols. On Nexus 9, I'll have none of that. Just survival. And surviving is what humans do best. Time passed, quickly. Soon, John was being led to a small egg-shaped drop pod. It wasn't much more than a metal shell with a seat, designed to break through a planet's atmosphere and land its passenger with minimal damage. A group of council members and diplomats had gathered to witness his departure. Some looked solemn, others satisfied. The Doraxian representatives were grinning, showing rows of sharp teeth. Lyra approached one last time as John prepared to enter the pod. When you survive, find a way to signal. I will be monitoring for any transmission from Nexus 9. John nodded. I appreciate that, Ambassador, but don't hold your breath. I might decide I like it there. The pod door closed with a hiss. Inside, John strapped himself into the single seat. The small window showed him the faces of those watching, aliens who thought they were sending him to his death. Little did they know that humans were classified as coming from a Class 4.5 death world themselves, something the Galactic Council's bureaucracy had overlooked when selecting his punishment. As the launch sequence began, John closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The pod shuddered around him. Just another Tuesday, he whispered to himself as the pod shot into space, carrying him toward a world that had earned the nickname, the Grinder. Behind him, the Galactic Council believed they had seen the last of John Carter. They were wrong. The drop pod fell through space like a bullet. Inside, John braced himself as the small craft began to shake. The journey from the Galactic Council station to Nexus 9 took only a few hours, but the last part would be the worst. Warning lights flashed red as the pod hit the upper atmosphere of Nexus 9. The outside of the craft began to glow from the heat of entry. John's knuckles turned white as he gripped the safety straps across his chest. Through the small window, he could see fire surrounding the pod. The craft's heat shields were being pushed to their limits. The pod was designed to get him to the surface alive, but just barely. No one expected him to survive long after that. The pod's computer spoke in a flat voice. Warning: atmospheric entry exceeding safety parameters. Probability of survival, 62%. Better odds than my last mission, John muttered. The shaking grew worse. A panel burst open near John's feet, spraying sparks. He kicked it closed with his boot. The temperature in the pod was rising quickly despite the cooling systems. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, The worst of the entry was over. The fire outside the window died down, replaced by swirling purple clouds. They were in the lower atmosphere now. The pod deployed stabilizing fins, slowing its descent. John got his first real look at Nexus 9 through breaks in the cloud cover. The landscape below was alien and hostile. Vast jungles of violet vegetation spread across the land. Mountain ranges with jagged peaks rose in the distance. A red ocean could be seen far to the east. "Prepare for landing," the computer said. "Deploying emergency thrusters in 3, 2, 1. The pod jerked violently as the thrusters fired. They weren't meant for a gentle landing, just enough to prevent the impact from killing him outright. John clenched his jaw and closed his eyes. The pod hit the ground with a crash that sent pain shooting up his spine. His head snapped forward, then back against the seat. For a moment everything went dark. When John opened his eyes again, the pod was still. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Smoke filled the cabin from burnt electronics. The computer was silent, dead from the impact. "Well," John said to himself, "that wasn't the worst landing I've ever had." He unbuckled the safety straps with shaking hands. His body ached, but nothing seemed broken. The exosuit had protected him from the worst of it. The air quality sensor on the pod's wall showed red. The atmosphere outside was toxic. High oxygen levels that would be good for breathing, but mixed with compounds that would damage his lungs over time. The exosuit would filter the air for now, but according to his briefing, the filters would fail within days. John knew he needed to move quickly. The pod had a self-destruct mechanism designed to activate a few hours after landing. The Galactic Council didn't want prisoners trying to use pod parts to signal for rescue. He gathered the small survival pack and checked that his knife was secure in its sheath. Then John hit the emergency release for the pod door. With a hiss of escaping pressure, the door slid open. Hot, humid air rushed in, carrying strange smells that made it through even the suit's filters. John stepped out onto the surface of Nexus 9. The jungle around him was alive with sounds. Things chirped, howled, and roared in the distance. The violet plant stood 3 times his height with leaves as big as car doors. The ground was soft and spongy under his feet. 2 suns hung in the sky, one large and red, the other smaller and yellow. Together they cast an eerie light that made shadows look deeper than they should. "First things first," John said to himself. "Salvage what I can from the pod before it blows up." He worked quickly and methodically. From the pod he managed to take the emergency beacon. It had been disabled, but some parts might be useful. 3 power cells from the pod's systems. Pieces of the outer hull that could serve as tools or shelter material. A section of the pod's insulation to use as bedding. As he worked, John kept alert to his surroundings. Twice he froze as large shadows passed overhead, flying creatures with wingspans wider than the pod itself. Once, something that sounded very large moved through the jungle about 50 yards away, snapping trees as it went. "Friendly neighbors," John muttered. With as much as he could carry strapped to his back, John knew he needed to find shelter before night fell. According to his briefing, the temperature would drop dramatically after sunset. He studied the terrain and chose to head toward higher ground visible through the trees. As he walked, John looked for signs of water. He had a purification device in his pack, but needed to find a source first. The jungle grew thicker as he moved. Strange insects, if that's what they were, buzzed around him. Some had too many wings, others too many eyes. One landed on his arm, a thing like a dragonfly, but with 4 sets of wings and a tail that curved like a scorpion's. John brushed it off quickly. After an hour of careful movement, he found what he was looking for, a small stream flowing down from the higher ground. The water was clear, but had a pinkish tint. John followed it uphill. The stream led him to a massive tree-like plant. It was easily 30 feet across at the base, with thick roots that spread out in all directions. Between 2 of these giant roots was a hollow large enough for a man to sit in, partially hidden by hanging vine-like growths. "Home sweet home," John said. He set down his salvaged materials and began to prepare the hollow as a shelter. Using pieces from the pod, John created a barrier across the front of the hollow that could be moved into place. He laid the insulation material inside as bedding. From his pack, he took a small device and activated it, a temporary force field that would keep smaller creatures out during the night. It would only last 8 hours before the battery died, but that would get him through his first night. As the twin suns began to sink toward the horizon, the jungle changed. The violet plants began to glow with faint bioluminescence. Creatures called to each other with increasing urgency. The temperature, which had been uncomfortably hot all day, started to drop noticeably. John checked his water supply. The purification device had cleaned a full container of the pink stream water. It tasted metallic but was safe to drink. From his rations, he chose a small protein bar, the standard issue for banished criminals. It tasted like cardboard but would keep him alive. As darkness fell completely, the temperature plummeted. John was glad for the insulation he'd salvaged. He activated one of the pod's power cells, creating a small heating element that would keep him from freezing. Outside his shelter, something large moved in the darkness. John could hear heavy breathing and the sound of claws scraping against the ground. Whatever it was circled his shelter several times, testing for a way in. The force field sparked as something touched it. There was an angry hiss, then the sound of the creature moving away. John lay on his back, knife in hand, listening to the alien night. The cold was seeping in despite the heating element. Somewhere far off, something screamed. Whether prey or predator, he couldn't tell. Most men would have been terrified. But John had spent nights in enemy territory, in deserts and jungles on Earth with nothing but his training and his will to survive. This was different, but the principles were the same. Day 1, he whispered to himself, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. Not even close to my worst Tuesday. As he drifted into a light, alert sleep, John was already planning tomorrow's tasks. Find more water, create weapons beyond his knife, explore his surroundings, and look for edible plants or creatures. The Galactic Council thought they had sentenced him to death. John Carter intended to prove them wrong. 3 weeks had passed since John Carter arrived on Nexus 9. The planet had tried to kill him many times, but he was still alive. The morning sun filtered through the leaves above John's new home. He had abandoned the hollow tree after the first week and built a better shelter on a rocky ledge halfway up a small cliff. From here, he could see danger coming and had a hard wall at his back. John stepped out of his shelter and stretched. His exosuit had begun to fail after just 4 days, exactly as expected. The filters went first, followed by the temperature regulators. Now it was little more than tough fabric, torn and patched in several places. But John had adapted. He wore a vest made from the hide of a predator he had killed. The creature had been something like a cross between a wolf and a lizard, with scales that were surprisingly good at blocking the planet's harmful radiation. Under that, he wore a shirt woven from fibers of a reed-like plant that grew by the stream. The fibers were naturally resistant to the toxic elements in the air. John picked up his spear, a 6-foot shaft of hard wood with his knife attached to the end. He had found a way to remove the knife when needed and reattach it for hunting. Beside the spear leaned a bow made from flexible wood and string created from animal tendon. The arrows were tipped with poison from a plant he had discovered could paralyze small creatures. Breakfast time, John said to himself as he climbed down from his ledge. He moved through the jungle with practiced ease now. He knew which sounds meant danger and which paths were safer to travel. He could identify at least 20 types of plants. That would kill him and 15 that had useful properties. John reached a clearing where he had set snares the previous evening. 2 traps had been sprung. One held a small, 6-legged animal that looked something like a rabbit, but with a scaled tail. The other contained a bird-like creature with no wings but 4 eyes and sharp teeth. Dinner and breakfast, John said as he collected his catch. On his way back to the shelter, John stopped to check on his garden. He had found several plants with edible roots and berries and transplanted them to a spot near his home. They were growing well in the rich soil. As he knelt to pick some berries, John noticed something strange. A small impression in the soft ground nearby. A footprint, but not his own. It was too small, with only 3 toes spread wide apart. John froze and scanned the area. Nothing moved except the ever-present insects. He studied the print more carefully. Whatever made it walked on 2 legs and weighed much less than him. It had passed through his garden recently, maybe while he was checking his traps. "Hello?" John called softly. "I won't hurt you." No response came from the jungle. After a careful check for more prints, John returned to his shelter. He built a small fire in the stone pit he had constructed. The smoke went out through a vent he had made in the roof. As he prepared his food, John thought about the footprint. In 3 weeks, he had seen no signs of intelligent life. The Galactic Council record stated that Nexus 9 had no sentient species, but someone, or something, had been watching him. After eating, John spent the day improving his shelter. The nights were getting colder as the planet's orbit carried it further from its suns. He needed better insulation. Near evening, as John worked on tanning another hide, he heard a strange sound from the jungle below. It was a high-pitched cry, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a struggle. John grabbed his spear and moved quickly down the cliff path. He followed the sounds until he reached a small clearing. There, he saw one of the wolf lizards attacking something. The predator was focused on its prey, clawing and snapping at something small that darted between its legs. Without hesitation, John hurled his spear. It struck the wolf lizard in the side, making it howl in pain. The creature turned toward him, yellow eyes full of hate. It charged. John drew a crude knife he had made from pod metal and crouched, ready to fight. But before the wolf lizard reached him, a small bolt of electricity hit it from behind. The predator stumbled, shook its head, and then resumed its charge toward John. John met the charge head-on, dodging the creature's teeth and driving his metal knife into its throat. Hot blood spurted out as the wolf lizard collapsed. John jumped, back avoiding the thrashing claws. As the predator died, John looked for whatever had shot electricity at it. At the edge of the clearing, he saw a small figure duck behind a tree. "Hey," John called. "I won't hurt you. You can come out." After a moment, a small creature stepped into view. It stood about 2 feet tall on 2 legs. Its body was covered in short blue fur, and it had 4 arms. 2 larger arms hung at its sides, while 2 smaller ones were crossed over its chest. Its head was round with 2 large black eyes and no visible nose. Instead of a mouth, it had what looked like a short trunk. The small being seemed frightened but curious. It pointed at the dead wolf lizard, then at John, then made a gesture with its 4 hands. "You're welcome," John said, guessing that the creature was thanking him. "Did you shoot electricity at that thing?" The small being nodded, which surprised John. It understood him. Then it held out one of its smaller hands. A tiny spark jumped between its fingers. "That's a neat trick," John said, smiling. He took a step forward, but the creature backed away. "It's okay, I'm John." He pointed to himself. John, the small creature, watched him for a moment, then pointed to itself and made a sound like "Zizit-ick." "Ziz-tick?" John repeated. The creature shook its head and tried again. "Spark," John said, understanding the sound was like electricity. "I'll call you Spark. Is that okay?" The creature, Spark, seemed to consider this, then nodded again. "Are there more like you?" John asked. But Spark didn't seem to understand this question. Instead, it pointed at John's shelter visible on the cliff, then at itself. "You've been watching me," John realized. "For how long?" Spark held up 3 fingers, then pointed at the suns crossing the sky. 3 days? "You've been watching me for 3 days?" Spark nodded, then pointed urgently at the darkening sky. Night was coming soon, and with it the dangers of the dark. "You're right," John said. "We should get to shelter. Want to come with me?" He gestured toward his cliff home. Spark seemed unsure, looking back into the jungle, then at John. Finally, Spark nodded and took a few steps toward John. John retrieved his spear from the dead wolf lizard and led the way back to his shelter. As they walked, he noticed how carefully Spark moved, always alert, just like him. This small creature had survived on Nexus 9 too. It knew how to stay alive in this deadly world. At the shelter, John built up the fire while Spark explored the small space. The little creature seemed fascinated by John's tools and the items he had salvaged from the pod. When John offered some cooked meat, Spark declined, but happily accepted some berries. It ate by passing the food into its trunk-like mouth. As they sat by the fire, John tried to communicate with simple gestures and words. He learned that Spark lived somewhere in the jungle but had been caught far from home when the wolf lizard attacked. Several times Spark made sounds and gestures that John couldn't understand, but they were clearly trying to tell him something important. That night, John made a small sleeping space for Spark near the fire. The little creature curled up, its blue fur glowing faintly in the dark. John watched his new companion for a while. He had been alone on this deadly planet for 3 weeks, fighting for survival every day. Now he had found someone else, something intelligent enough to communicate and form a connection. "Looks like I'm not alone after all," John whispered as he lay down to sleep. "Wonder what other surprises Nexus 9 has in store." Outside the shelter, the night sounds of the jungle grew louder. Something large roared in the distance. But inside, by the warm fire, John Carter had found an ally in this hostile world. Tomorrow he would try to learn more about Spark and whatever the little creature was trying to tell him. The next morning, John woke to find Spark already up and waiting by the entrance of the shelter. The small blue creature pointed excitedly at the jungle below, then back at John. "You want to show me something?" John asked as he gathered his weapons. Spark nodded and made a series of gestures with all 4 arms. After 3 days together, John had begun to understand some of Spark's simple signs. This one meant, "Follow me," and "important." "Lead the way," John said, securing his knife and spear. Spark moved through the jungle with impressive speed and skill. The little creature knew exactly which plants to avoid and which sounds meant danger. John followed closely, mapping their route in his mind. They traveled for over 2 hours, going deeper into the jungle than John had ever ventured. The terrain began to change. The ground sloped downward and the purple plants grew larger and stranger. Giant mushroom-like growths towered overhead, releasing clouds of spores that sparkled in the sunlight. "Is it safe to breathe this?" John asked, covering his mouth with a piece of cloth. Spark made a yes gesture but pointed at John's eyes, then made a spinning motion with one finger. "The spores affect vision? Make you dizzy?" Spark nodded. They continued downward until they reached what looked like a dead end, a solid wall of rock covered in glowing moss. Spark approached the wall and pressed a specific pattern in the moss. To John's surprise, a section of the wall slid aside, revealing a dark tunnel. Spark produced a small ball of electricity between 2 fingers, creating enough light to see. The little creature motioned for John to follow. "You really live down here?" John asked as they entered the tunnel. The passage was small but not cramped. It sloped gently downward, leading deeper underground. The walls were smooth, clearly made by intelligent hands, not natural formation. After walking for several minutes, the tunnel opened into a large cavern. John stopped and stared in amazement. The underground space was enormous, lit by thousands of the same glowing mushrooms they had seen outside, but smaller versions. Streams of water flowed through channels cut into the stone floor, and everywhere there were structures, homes built into the cavern walls, bridges spanning across open spaces, gardens of strange plants growing under special lights. Most importantly, there were hundreds of creatures like Spark moving through the underground city. "You're not alone," John whispered. "You have a whole civilization down here." Spark made a proud gesture, then led John forward. The other creatures stopped what they were doing and stared at the human. Some looked afraid, others curious. A few made threatening gestures, but Spark responded with a series of rapid electrical pulses that seemed to calm them. They approached a central structure, larger than the others. Inside, a group of older-looking creatures sat in a semicircle. Their fur was lighter blue, almost white with age. They wore simple garments decorated with patterns of metal that seemed to amplify their electrical abilities. The oldest one spoke, a series of clicks, whistles, and electrical buzzes. Spark responded, pointing at John several times during the exchange. One of the elders held out a small device to Spark, who brought it to John. It was a simple metal disc with a button in the center. "What's this?" John asked. Spark mimicked pressing the button and then pointed at John's ear. Cautiously, John pressed the button. The disc hummed, then attached itself to John's ear. For a moment, there was pain as tiny filaments inserted themselves into his skin, but it quickly faded. "Can you understand me now?" The voice was strange, like it came from inside his own head rather than through his ears. "Yes," John said, surprised. "What is this thing?" "Translation device," the voice replied. "Old technology from before, not perfect, limited vocabulary, but helps." John realized the voice was coming from the oldest of the elders who was now approaching him. "I am Zixtor, elder speaker of the Nexian people," the creature said through the translator. "Sparkkin tells us you saved him from death. Shows you are not like others sent here to die." "Others? You mean other prisoners have been sent here before me?" "Many times. Many species, all die quickly, fight the world instead of learning to live within it. You different. You adapt. Like us." John looked around the underground city with new understanding. "Your people built all this? How long have you been here?" Zixtor made a gesture, and one of the other elders brought forward a metal tablet covered in strange symbols. "Our history. Many generations ago, we had cities above ground, technology, space travel." The old Nexian's voice carried sadness even through the crude translator. "Then came the burning." "The burning?" "Ships came, from the stars. They changed our world, made it poison, made new beasts to hunt us, destroyed everything we built above. The Doraxians," John said, the pieces falling into place. "They did this to your planet." Zixtor seemed surprised. "You know the destroyers?" "I know them. They're the reason I'm here. I exposed their illegal activities on another world, and they had me banished here to die." The elders conferred among themselves, their electrical communications too complex for the translator to process. Finally, Zixtor turned back to John. "Come. Must show you something important." John followed the elder deeper into the cavern system. They entered a tunnel that sloped upward, eventually reaching a small chamber with a metal door. Zixtor pressed a complex pattern, and the door slid open. Inside was a room filled with technology that looked out of place compared to the simple life of the underground city. Screens showed images of the planet's surface. One large monitor displayed a familiar sight, the Galactic Council's station in orbit. "You've been watching them," John said, understanding. "Always watching. Must know when destroyers return. Must protect what remains of our people." Zixtor activated another screen. It showed recordings of drop pods like John's, landing on different parts of the planet over the years. John watched as alien creatures emerged from the pods only to succumb to the planet's dangers within days. "Why show me this?" John asked. "Because you survived. Because you fought the destroyers before." Zixtor's large eyes fixed on John. "And because we need help." The elder pressed another control and a holographic map appeared. It showed an area of the planet John hadn't seen, a massive crater with a structure in the center. "What is that?" "Weapon. Doraxian weapon. Left behind after burning. Still active. Still changing our world, making it more deadly every cycle. Soon we'll kill everything, even us underground." John studied the map. "You want me to help you destroy it?" "Yes. We tried. Many died. Cannot approach. Defenses too strong. But you?" Zixtor pointed at John. "You human. Different biology. Different thinking. Maybe you find way." John considered the request. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but if he succeeded, he might save the Nexians and make this world livable again. "If I help you destroy this weapon, can you help me contact the Galactic Council? Let them know what the Doraxians did to your world?" Zixtor's trunk-like mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Yes. Have old communications equipment. Not used for generations, but could work. John took a deep breath. Then we have a deal. I'll help you destroy the weapon, and you'll help me expose the truth about the Duraxians. The elder extended one small hand. John shook it gently. Together, Zixtor said, we bring justice. As they left the room, Spark was waiting outside. The small Nexian looked up at John with a question in his large eyes. Yes, John said. I'm going to help your people. But I'll need your help too, Spark. Spark's fur glowed brighter with what John now recognized as happiness. The little creature had found John for a reason, to be a bridge between humans and Nexians, between the condemned prisoner and the forgotten civilization. Together, they might just survive this death world after all. 6 months had passed since John Carter was banished to Nexus 9. The twin suns rose over the horizon, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape. Where once there had been only deadly jungle, now grew carefully tended gardens. The toxic plants had been cleared away and replaced with crops that both humans and Nexians could eat. Several simple buildings stood in a clearing, constructed from local materials but designed with human ingenuity. John stood on a hill overlooking this small settlement. Beside him was Spark, now wearing a small vest with tools attached to it. In the months they had worked together, Spark had become not just John's friend but his right hand in building cooperation between humans and Nexians. The signal should reach the council station today, John said, looking at the tall metal tower they had built. It was made from parts of the Duraxian weapon they had successfully disabled 2 months ago. The mission to destroy the weapon had been dangerous. John and a team of brave Nexians had journeyed to the crater, facing the worst dangers of the planet. 3 Nexians had died, and John himself had nearly been killed when the weapon's defense systems activated. But in the end, they had succeeded. John's human perspective had found a weakness in the Duraxian technology that the Nexians couldn't see. Working together, they had shut down the terraforming weapon that had been making the planet more hostile for centuries. With the weapon disabled, Nexus 9 had begun a slow healing process. Already the air was less toxic in some regions. Plants that the Nexians remembered from their history were starting to grow again in protected areas. Do you think they will come? Spark asked, through the improved translator they had built. They'll come, John said. The Galactic Council sends a probe every year to confirm the death of each prisoner. When they detect our signal instead, they'll have to investigate. John had spent months working with the Nexians to repair their ancient communication equipment. Together, they had recorded the true history of Nexus 9, how the Duraxian Empire had attacked the peaceful Nexian civilization centuries ago, turning their paradise world into a deadly prison to hide their crime. The signal they were sending included images of the Nexian underground cities, proof of the Duraxian weapon, and data showing how the planet had been artificially made hostile. It was evidence the Galactic Council couldn't ignore. Look, Spark pointed to the sky. A small dot of light was growing larger. Right on time, John said with a smile. The yearly probe. But as the light grew closer, John realized it wasn't the small probe he expected. It was much larger. A council shuttle designed for personnel transport. They sent people, not just a probe, John said, surprised. The shuttle descended slowly, landing in the cleared area near the settlement. John and Spark made their way down the hill to meet the visitors. The shuttle's door opened and out stepped a familiar blue figure, Ambassador Lyra. Her large purple eyes widened at the sight of John. John Carter, she said, her voice filled with amazement. You are alive. Behind her came several other council representatives, including 2 Duraxians, whose shark-like faces showed clear displeasure. Not just alive, John said. Thriving. And, I'm not alone. The council members stared at Spark and the other Nexians who had gathered at a safe distance. Impossible, one of the Duraxians hissed. This planet has no native sentient life. Actually, John said, it does. The Nexians have lived here for thousands of years. They had space travel before your people bombed their civilization back to the Stone Age. He held up a data crystal. We have proof of everything. The Duraxian attacked centuries ago. The bioweapon they left behind to make sure the Nexians would never recover. The deliberate misclassification of this planet as uninhabited, so it could be used as a prison. Lyra took the crystal, her hands trembling slightly. The Council received your signal. Many did not believe it was real. They thought it was a malfunction or a trick. That's why I insisted we come in person, said another council member, a tall, insect-like being. To verify these extraordinary claims, the Duraxians moved forward aggressively. This human clearly suffered brain damage from exposure to the toxic environment. And these creatures are the rightful inhabitants of this world, John interrupted. And they deserve justice. Over the next few hours, John and the Nexian elders presented their evidence to the council representatives. They showed them the disabled weapon, the underground cities, and the historical records the Nexians had preserved. The evidence was overwhelming. Even the Duraxian representatives couldn't deny the truth when faced with the deactivated weapon bearing their empire's insignia. As the second sun began to set, the council members gathered back at the shuttle to discuss what they had seen. The Cairn, full council must see this, Lyra said to John. Will you come back with us? Both you and representatives of the Nexians? John looked at Spark and Zixtor. What do you think? Ready to see the stars your ancestors once traveled? Zixtor nodded, solemnly. We must tell our story. For all who died. For all who survived. 3 weeks later, John Carter stood once again in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council. This time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Spark, Zixtor, and 3 other Nexian elders, all wearing special suits designed to help them breathe in the station's atmosphere. The hall was filled to capacity. Representatives from every species in the galaxy had come to witness this historic session. Supreme Judge Zex Thul called for order. This emergency session of the Galactic Council will now begin. We are here to address the evidence presented by John Carter of Earth and the newly discovered Nexian species regarding crimes committed by the Duraxian Empire. The evidence was presented in full detail. The Duraxian representatives tried to claim it was all ancient history, actions taken by a previous government that the current empire shouldn't be held responsible for. But when the records showed that the weapon had been maintained and updated as recently as 10 years ago, their defense crumbled. John stepped forward to address the council. 6 months ago, you sentenced me to death for exposing Duraxian crimes. You sent me to a world you thought would kill me. Instead, I found allies and uncovered an even greater crime. He gestured to the Nexians. These people deserve recognition. Their world deserves healing. And the Duraxian Empire deserves to be held accountable. The Council voted overwhelmingly to recognize the Nexian civilization and their rightful claim to their planet. They allocated resources to help restore Nexus 9 to its former state, and they placed severe sanctions on the Duraxian Empire for their centuries of deception. As for John, his punishment was formally commuted. More than that, he was offered a new position, official human ambassador to the Galactic Council, with special responsibility for relations with the Nexian people. You have a rare perspective, Lyra told him after the session. You see possibilities where others see only obstacles. That's what humans do, John replied with a smile. We adapt, we overcome, we survive. Later, as John and Spark stood at a viewport looking out at the stars, the small Nexian made a gesture John had come to recognize as thoughtful curiosity. What happens now? Spark asked. Now, we rebuild your world. We introduce the Council to Earth, and we make sure no one can ever do what the Duraxians did again. Spark's fur glowed with excitement. And you? Will you stay with us? John nodded. For a while at least. I've gotten pretty good at living on a Deathworld. Not Deathworld anymore, Spark corrected. Now it is just home. John looked out at the stars, thinking of the planet below where he had been sent to die but instead found purpose. Of Earth, where his species had evolved through countless challenges to reach the stars. Of all the obstacles humans had overcome throughout their history. You know, he said to Spark, Being banished to a death world turned out to be just another Tuesday for a human. But what comes next? That's going to be something special. Spark's electrical hum of agreement was the only response needed as they stood together, a human and a Nexian, looking toward a future neither of their species could have imagined alone.